Greetings, everybody. Welcome to episode 29 of Relentless. And I'm very excited today to have a wonderful Relentless guest, and it is James Roguski. Let me add him to the stream. Hi, James. How are you?
Good day, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. So we're going to talk about the World Health Organization, the Public Health Agency, and the international health regulations that are currently being negotiated with the working group. I like that term, the working group, like they're doing something constructive for humanity, and the amendments to the international health regulations. We have spoken before, and that was back in June, and we talked about the pandemic treaty. So I want to make it really clear that we're not talking about the pandemic treaty today, or the WHO Cut Plus. That's very different. So if anybody wants to watch that video, I'll put the link in the description and you can go along and watch that about the pandemic treaty. We're not talking about that today at all. Two different things. So James, can you just let everybody know briefly what you've been spending a huge amount of time in regards to the international health regulations over the last period of time?
Well, let me add a little tiny something to the reason why we're not talking about the WHO CA Plus Framework Convention, commonly known as the Pandemic Treaty for Prevention, Preparedness, and Response to whatever they're going to hoist on us. A couple of weeks ago, the intergovernmental negotiating body essentially admitted that they screwed up. And back in April, the nations were not coming to agreement. They were having these meetings, and you could just feel it. The room was tense. And so on April 2nd or 3rd or so, they said, okay, to all of the nations, submit the text that you want to have added to what we're working on currently. It was called the zero draft at that time. And by April 22nd, submit whatever you want to have us consider. And they promised to have a compilation text by May 22nd. And they circulated that quietly, and then they published on June 2nd, not the compilation draft, which rumor has it is 208 pages of the submissions from the various nations. That's a top secret document. Boy, if anybody's got that, let me know. They're not letting that out, right? What they published instead was a 43-page document, which was the Bureau's text. So they keep saying that it's a member nation-led process of negotiation, but the Bureau keeps stepping in, and they cherry-picked what they wanted to put into the draft that was being negotiated. Well, that was in June, so July, August, September, 3 months. That didn't go so well. And the nations who did not see their text in the Bureau's draft pretty much put their foot down, and they expressed how unhappy they were about that. So a couple of weeks ago, they said, well, we're just going to throw away all these old versions and come up with a negotiating text. Sometime in the middle of October, they'll circulate it quietly amongst, the insiders. And then they say maybe they'll have it by, for us here in the U.S., Halloween, right? Trick or treat. I bet we get a trick. I doubt that we're going to get a treat. And so
that's right.
at this moment in time, if anybody is talking about a pandemic treaty, they can't possibly know what they're talking about, because all of the old ones are kicked into the garbage bin and the new one's coming at some point. So that's all I'm going to say about it.
Yeah. Well, I'll be looking forward to, I can't believe I'm saying looking forward to, but looking forward to reading that in the latter part of the year, or in the new part of the new year. Yeah, wow. Okay. Yes, it's always a treat to read that document.
So that only leaves at least 3 other tracks to talk about. And so before we get into all of the amendments and such, which we're going to focus on, a couple of weeks ago, September 18th to the 22nd, there were meetings in the UN in New York, not the WHO. And an interesting set of events happened there. So I'll briefly try to talk about that, catch everybody up. They were having what they call high-level meetings. And the week entailed 4 topics: the Sustainable Development Goals, Monday and Tuesday, and then pandemic prevention, and then universal health care and tuberculosis. And the bright idea of the UN was that about a year ago, they set up these meetings, and they had been circulating political declarations, documents, amongst all of the United Nations delegates. And on September 1st or so, they circulated what they call the silence procedure drafts. And what that means, it's a big thing with them. You have to understand what they do. They felt that they had a document that everybody could agree to, and so they circulate it, and you can accept it by just pretty much doing nothing, just remaining silent. You go, yeah, it's okay, fine, whatever.
Yep.
If you break the silence, it means that, oh, they don't have consensus. Somebody's unhappy about something. Yikes, right? We're not going to be able to make this happen. And so on Sunday the 17th, the day before they start all these meetings, 11 nations who obviously had spent some time working together sent a letter to the president of the UN General Assembly, and they said, nope, not having it. And so I don't know if I can remember them all off the top of my head, but it was an interesting list of nations: Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Eritrea, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Russia, and I know I'm forgetting somebody. I apologize to whoever that other country was. You might think of them sort of as, outcasts. Zimbabwe. Thank you. My girlfriend knows everything. And so it came as quite a surprise, and they literally said in there, and what they did is they called attention to a very simple rule, right? They were having these high-level meetings, and a bunch of important mucky-mucks showed up, but it wasn't the official United Nations General Assembly meeting. And so they said, well, we don't appreciate you pretending like this is the full-on UN. And so what they did at the meeting, the president opened up the meeting. If you were 5 minutes late, you missed all the excitement. He said, okay, well, we're talking about this document, and I trust that, you're all happy that, we're going to talk about this at some point in the future. So for now, we adopt it. And, it's just a propaganda fest for the remainder of the day. And so that's how they roll, right? And so all that was ever really meant to be was a show of unity to put the winds, behind the sail or into the sails of the WHO's negotiations. Well, things are not going all that great for them, and I couldn't be happier, right? And so those are 2 separate tracks that we've talked enough about. And in the middle 2 tracks, almost everybody gets completely befuddled because there are 2 separate sets of amendments to talk about. And there's actually more than that, but we'll keep it simple.
Yeah, so sorry, James, just so that everybody knows what we're moving to now. Now we're going to talk about the international health regulations, and this is really, exactly what you said. People, the waters get very muddy with all the stuff out there. So sorry I interrupted. Keep going, James.
Oh no, please keep going. Please keep going. I thought you were going to show your handy little thing that we're going to be talking about.
I can bring that up now. Yeah, so I have printed it off, but I'm going to share the screen. So if you go along to stoptheamendments.com, let me just share my screen. James has on this page a wonderful people's guide to the proposed amendments. Let me just come back so I can see what we're doing. And there it is. Great. And so that's the top of it there. Stop the amendments. And if you go down, there's a great video there. If you go down and see this yellow and gold, the People's Guide to the Proposed Amendments to the International Health Regulations, there's a little download tab there. You can download it and print it off. And I would really recommend to everybody to do that because it's, 16 pages? It's a nice bedtime read. That sounds weird as well. But it is. It's very succinct, very clear, and all the important bits there. Instead of if you're time poor, like a lot of people, instead of trying to fish through the international health regulations and the amendments, this is a really nice document that everybody can download, print off, and read through. So, yeah, James, so I thought to talk about this, we'll break it into two parts, and we can see there on the screen that we can go down to this third line there. The amendments that were adopted on the 27th of May must be rejected by late November. That will be the first part we'll talk about. And then there's another larger group of amendments which haven't been adopted yet, but they're being negotiated by this working group. So that'll be the second part of the international health regulations that we're going to talk about. So, yeah, James, did you want to talk about the first part with these 5 amendments that were adopted on May 27, and which, of course, this open letter talks about there on stoptheamendments.com. Did you want to talk about that, James?
Yes, absolutely. But actually, first, I want to talk about the sleep-inducing nature of WHO documents. Hopefully, I pulled out the parts that are actually enraging and things that should get you fired up. So I don't know if it's necessarily the best nighttime reading, but if you pull out the 197-page originally submitted documents, okay, and the 97-page review committee's final report analysis of the 197 pages. Seriously, when I first got a hold of those, I would start reading them and I'd just fall asleep because the way they're written, they keep using the same words over and over and over. And you really have to take it one little chunk at a time and stop and go, if I'm a good person and I read this paragraph, how would I interpret it? And if I put on my evil genius, glasses, how could I manipulate those very same words? And if you, get into it and you realize what's going on here, when they finally come out with whatever their final version is, I suspect it's going to be a masterpiece of propaganda. The person who glances at it, like one of the versions that they had of the treaty, the first 3, 4, 5 pages are just sickeningly sweet propaganda that give you diabetes just reading. It's just dripping with goodness. Oh, transparency and equity and personal freedom and sovereignty, whatever. And the average person would start reading that and go, oh, this doesn't sound so bad. But then when you actually get into what it really is, it's horrific. And so I condensed maybe 300 pages or so of stuff down to about 16. So hopefully, if you can handle that little chunk of craziness, you'll have an idea of what it is we're talking about here. And so the first part of it is where reasonably almost everybody's confused. Okay. The way this all started for me is really even before I even got involved with any of this. In November and December of 2021, they had a special session of the World Health Assembly. And the reason had really nothing to do with health when you really look at the long picture. And so in 2020, everybody was deadly afraid of COVID. And the idea was, oh, just wait for the jabs, and when the jabs come out, we'll jab the hospital workers, we'll jab the elderly, and then everybody in the world will get jabbed, and it'll all be wonderful, right? And so what then happened was the plan shifted a little bit because the wealthier nations bought up 10 times what they needed, and the relatively poor nations couldn't buy a contract. And after about 6 months of that, they were concerned. They thought the jabs at the time were like the greatest thing in the world. They're being they're not being given something that could save lives, right? And so they called for this special session, and they said that they needed to have agreements that would require that there be an equitable way of distributing pandemic response products. So you keep hearing the word equity, right? Well,
yeah.
in my world, the word equity means money, right? And so there were also negotiations going on about the amendments. And in January of 2022, the Biden administration, I believe, surprised most of the other nations because at the last minute, they submitted a bunch of amendments to the international health regulations. And I think all of the other nations went, wait a minute, we've been negotiating here. You're jumping the gun. And when they looked at what the Biden administration had proposed, they rejected them, not really because of the same reasons you or I might, but because it was putting a lot of requirements and demands on them. And their perspective was, well, what's in it for us? And so they said, look, we're not going to agree to that. And to save face, the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, Japan, Australia, a handful of other countries submitted, I think illegitimately, a separate batch of amendments. And what it entailed was the United States was trying to shorten the period of time that future amendments would come into effect. Yeah. Currently, the rules in the existing international health regulations are there's 18 months after the World Health Assembly adopts them, not for the nation to vote on them or have Parliament review them or have the president or prime minister sign it. No, that's not part of the deal. The leader of the nation has 18 months to reject them. So you've gone through a couple of leaders, right? And so the current one wasn't around when these were adopted in May of 2022. So, arguably they could say, oh, well, the previous administration agreed to these, we're going to reject them. There's a little bit of a way out. Yeah, I realize I realize it's not going to happen because you've got two things that are cut from the same cloth, but you also have, another election right around the corner. And so whoever may be in power may look at it and go, oh, wait a second. They have the power to stand up for their nation and just write a letter to the WHO and go, no, sorry, we're new here and we're just going to reject what these other people did because we weren't in on that, right? Now, I'm not, saying that's going to happen, but that's the procedure that these go through. And so
I think it's important for people to understand that these amendments can be rejected by our leader, which at this point in time is Albert Sneezy, and it's important to realise that, because really what it means, you've just articulated that you don't hold any hopes that that'll happen, and neither do I, and I think most of the people watching this program would agree as well. But I think people need to understand that this is certainly a situation where our leader, and I'll say in air quotes, has let down the Australian public, because he has the opportunity to reject these amendments, and I don't hold any hope that he will. So it just goes to show that not only is it not on mainstream media, nobody hears about it, it's all being muddied in the waters. Our leader is letting us down once again. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there, James.
No problem. And so the idea with what is going on with the amendments confuses most people because they believe, well, the WHO adopts these and we should get to vote on them. But that absolutely is just simply not the case. And
That's
so
right.
the Biden administration wanted to shorten it down to 6 months, which would mean that if they adopt him next May, that it would still be the Biden administration 6 months after May. But it got pushed out to 10 months. So we're holding out hope that a new president, a new Congress will be in office in 2025. And I hope that the population is made aware enough of what is going on here so that whoever the president may be, they realize that the people want out of the WHO. Okay.
Yep.
And so now getting to the real heart of the matter, um, when the Biden administration tried to pull that fast one in 2022, and the nations, smaller nations around the world looked at it and said, well, wait a minute, this is just putting demands on us. What's in it for us? They created a process where they set up this working group and they said, we'll have all of the nations submit amendments or proposed amendments by September 30th of 2022. And in effect, they said, well, you want to change the regulations? We'll show you how to change the regulations. So they came up with 197 pages, 307 amendments. And those were submitted more than a year ago. They kept them completely secret until mid-December. And they did reveal most of the original proposals. Still haven't seen the original proposal from Japan. And for the last 9 months or so, they've been negotiating in secret, and not a word about any changes or new versions or second draft, third draft. So even though I wrote this whole summary of the proposals that were made a year ago and were available 9 or 10 months ago, in reality, we have no idea what the current status is because they've been busy negotiating them in secret for 9 months. So take everything in that People's Guide with a grain of salt, because we have no idea what they might be agreeing to. Now, I know you and I had talked, and we said we were going to play the video at the end, but it might be good to play that video sooner than the end so that we can actually talk about what happened this week. And so this week in Geneva, they were meeting, the working group was meeting, and normally what they've been doing is they'll meet the whole week, they'll live stream and record and make public the first session in the morning of Monday, and then they disappear. They don't make any of it public until the last session on Friday, and then they just kind of summarize and they put a little document, final report, and they tell you what they talked about, but you don't get any details. And so I was fully expecting to wake up Monday morning, which I did, and I was watching their normally really boring presentation. Sometimes sometimes there's little bits of interest, and I was actually completely surprised. I still am a bit surprised because they said the quiet part out loud in public. It's recorded, and if you can play the video, if we got that queued up, it's
absolutely.
It's on stoptheamendments.com. It's, I believe, the first video.
Yes, it is. So I'll just add it to
the morning of Monday, October the 2nd, 2023. And I have some news to report from the 5th meeting of the Working Group for Amendments to the International Health Regulations. The news is that apparently they're having difficulty reaching agreement, and they seem to realize that they are not going to meet their deadline to submit a package of amendments by mid-January 2024. It appears that their solution to this failure on their behalf is that they're going to bend the rules to the point of breaking. There is a deadline, in Article 55, which clearly states that any submission from a state, member state, or from the Director General must be submitted to all member nations 4 months in advance of the May World Health Assembly. Well, it appears that they realize that they're going to fail to meet that deadline. And so their solution is to try to bend the rules and get away with it. Well, no. The answer is no. You have failed. You are going to fail. You will not break the rules. You're going to miss your deadline. And you will not be allowed to break the rules because the rules were put in place for a reason. The amendments that are being proposed must be submitted 4 months in advance of the assembly so that there is adequate time for we, the people, to understand what those proposals are and to weigh in on them around the world. You do not get to change the rules and continue negotiating, changing everything in that 4-month period that is supposed to be reserved for public comment and comprehension of the proposals. The answer is no.
Dear colleagues, we have been operating with the understanding that the package of the proposed amendments resulting from the work of this group would be finalized by January 2024 to meet the 4-month deadline stated in Article 55. However, we believe that we all share the same sentiment that realistically, the whole package of amendments will probably not be ready by January 2024. We would like to ask the Secretariat whether procedurally we could continue working until the 76th World Health Assembly in May 2024.
I believe that the co-chair just misspoke and meant to say the 77th World Health Assembly in 2024.
I'd like to ask the Secretariat to provide some guidance in this matter.
Thank you, Co-Chair. The Health Assembly, in decision WHA 75-9, requested the working group, and I quote, to establish a program of work consistent with decision EB 153 and taking into consideration the report of the IHR Review Committee to propose a package of targeted amendments for consideration by the 77th World Health Assembly in accordance with Article 55 of the International Health Regulations, close quote. Article 55 of the IHR, which is referred to in Decision 75-9, sets out 2 procedural requirements relating to proposed amendments. The first one is that, quote, proposals for amendments shall be submitted to the Health Assembly for its consideration, close quote. The second one is that, open quote, the text of any such proposed amendment shall be communicated to all states parties by the Director General at least 4 months before the Health Assembly at which it is proposed for consideration, close quote. Again, that's the text of the relevant article of the IHR, Article 55.
Please take a moment to read Article 55 of the International Health Regulations, which makes it clear that there is a 4-month deadline before the World Health Assembly meets in May of 2024, and they have every intention of breaking that rule. Listen to them attempt to come up with some sort of language to justify their failure. Section 2 here clearly shows that there are 4 months before the assembly at which these must be submitted.
Can I just ask a question there, your thoughts? I'm not sure, because you watched that, I didn't. The secretary there, was it the secretary giving the guidance?
Well, the gentleman to the right was the head of the secretariat, which is essentially a fancy word for secretary. The gentleman who was talking was Stephen Solomon, who is the chief legal counsel for the Secretariat. So the
So
person speaking was their legal counsel.
Did they have a break in between the first gentleman asking for guidance, or did he have a prepared answer ready to go?
He
Optics.
absolutely had a prepared answer for that.
So
No doubt
they've
about
talked about this before, and they had an answer ready to go, and it's just a little stage play that they can televise for the world to see, to tell everyone that we're not going to get the job done.
I think they were a little nervous because they made a couple of simple mistakes. But if you want to play the remainder of it, here's where you just get a word salad that is designed to just confuse the daylights out of you.
Article 55 of the IHR, including this 4-month requirement, has never been applied to amendments submitted collectively by a subdivision of the Health Assembly, which is exactly what the WGIHR is. The WGIHR is a subdivision of the Health Assembly under Rule 41 of the Rules of Procedure of the Health Assembly. Thus, there are no precedents to rely on with respect to the manner in which the 4-month requirement set out in Article 55 should be satisfied. That is to say, Article 55 has been applied to amendments proposed by a state party or by the Director General, but never by a subdivision of the Health Assembly. Indeed, it has only been applied with respect to, it has not been applied with respect to any subdivision. This is a first. Accordingly, an option for consideration by the working group would be for the Director General to communicate in January 2023.
I believe that he just misspoke and meant to say January 2024.
The following documents to all states parties.
He also, I caught this a couple of days ago, but I had already done the video. He also quoted the wrong article for where he was saying it's a subdivision. I went and looked it up, and it's actually Article 40. So the nervousness and the lack of confidence that you can see in the body language is amazing, and that's what happens when you're just lying out your butt.
Wow, honestly. Oh, we'll I've got a couple of questions, but I'll ask them when we finish watching this performance. Let's call it that, shall we?
First, the proposed amendments, as originally submitted by member states and already communicated by the Secretariat to all states parties by email. And second, the proposed amendments, as they might be shown on the screen at the closure of WGHR 6. This approach would allow work to continue in the WGIHR, if necessary, up until the 77th Health Assembly itself, recognizing the importance of complementarity with the INB process, which, as we know, is mandated to work up until the 77th WHA. In addition to that, the working group may consider requesting the Secretariat to include in the January communication from the Director General a clarification according to which the amendments from the final session of the WGIHR, which could be conceivably as late as May 2024, if necessary, would allow these final results of such a session to be formally submitted to the 77th World Health Assembly. A note on this deadline of the 77th World Health Assembly. If the deadline is not met, the WGIHR would be expected to report to the Health Assembly in May 2024 that agreement could not be reached on the proposed amendments. This deadline cannot be changed as it was set out in decision WHA 75-9. This approach just outlined for your consideration would fulfill the 4-month requirement in its purpose as prescribed by Article 55 of the IHR, while at the same time allowing the working group to continue its consideration and negotiation of the proposed amendments, including possible modifications to the package that would be communicated to states parties. Should this approach be considered satisfactory, the working group may wish to consider reflecting it in the report of this session of the WGIHR. Thank you, co-chairs.
Very simply stated, we, the people of the world, cannot allow the working group for amendments to the international health regulations to even remotely believe that they will get to break the rules and avoid the deadline, which would afford each and every one of us 4 months to review their work before it's considered by the 77th World Health Assembly. The answer is simply no.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
I would like to translate that into English very briefly. Okay. They clearly said, and their body language was screaming, we're not going to make the deadlines. And
Yep.
Stephen Solomon was wheeled up to the front stage to try to sugarcoat that pile of crap. And so what they said was, well, we'll take the things that were submitted a year ago and we'll give you a working thing that we've got going on here that we haven't let anybody see. And we'll submit that as the final package 4 months in advance of the meeting. And we're going to keep working on it. And just before the meeting, we'll give you the final version and then you can vote on it. And, the public comment is non-existent. And the idea is that 4 month period was built into the regulations so that each nation could learn what's being considered and have 4 months to consider it, and then have 18 months after it to be considered, to reject it. So you have 4 months to consider adopting it and 18 months to consider rejecting it. They want to bring that down to like maybe a nanosecond to consider it before you vote on adopting it. And they wanted to shorten it to 6 months, but it's going to be 10 months. So they don't want anybody to see what they're doing before they adopt it.
That's right. And I really like how, I've forgotten the gentleman's name already, the secretariat. He was saying that there's no...
Stephen Solomon. Stephen Solomon. Yep.
He was saying that there's no precedence for this, especially for a subdivision of the assembly. So basically, they are making that precedence now, which basically means that, as we were talking before, sorry, sir, haven't done my homework, and I won't give you any time to mark it. But when I do give it to you, you're just going to give me a pass anyway. And so they're creating that precedence right now by allowing this to proceed in this manner. What a disgrace.
The article in the regulations says very clearly that only nations and the Director General can submit amendments to the member nations. Okay? So if this body is to submit it at all, it has to be submitted to the Director General. And so that is not something they want, right? They don't want these documents to be submitted solely by the Director General. What they wanted was to have a package of amendments and then to have all 194 nations put their name on the package and submit that to the WHO. Well, they're not going to get that, okay? And so this whole cockamamie story about a subdivision, that's the whole point. Yep. You don't have a unanimous agreement on a package of targeted amendments that could be submitted by each and every one of the 194 member nations and the 2 that have signed on that are not members. They're failing. And so they're trying to concoct this story. Well, the rules are clear. You shall submit the amendments 4 months in advance. Okay. So whatever they submit after the last meeting that conceivably could be in May, I'm pretty sure that any day in May is not 4 months in advance of the last week of May.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fundamental calendar, right?
Yep.
They're on the verge of failing, and so they're going to resort to cheating and lying.
Yeah, and just talking about how they're not being negotiated openly and it's all secret. We had the Australian government on August the 7th, if I'm not mistaken, put out a consultation paper and a survey for the Australian public, and this is it here. For the Australian public to weigh in on what they've termed, it, preparing for and responding to future pandemics and other international health emergencies. Now, I have two problems with this. One is that they've put it out there and nobody would know that they had done it. It's kind of it's there so they can say they did it, but nobody was made aware of it. And secondly, if you read their consultation paper here that is supposedly to inform people about completing this survey, it really does combine information about the international health regulations and the bureau text, but they don't call that here. They call it the pandemic instrument is what they term it. So they've called it something else in this paper, the Australian government. So this is a great example, this survey where they want the input. You only get, I think it was only 5 weeks from the 7th of August to the 17th of September to do the survey, just under 5 weeks. They really muddied the waters for people as we started off the show talking about it's very confusing about the bureau text and the international health regulations. Well, this does a fine job of muddying the waters as well and is not transparent. They use all those words there about being transparent with the public and they want their input and all those sorts of things. No, it's not. And it certainly wasn't advertised anywhere for people to have their input. So, you know, they really are negotiating things in an underhanded way, as we've just seen in that video, and the Australian government are participating in that underhandedness as well and trying to keep things secret.
And so the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties looked at all of this information, and they basically said, there's no need to say anything about it. I believe it was from May to June of this year. There was a petition that was circulated throughout Australia, and in 30 days, over 55,000 people signed the petition, and it was essentially to say, not about the treaty or WHOCA plus framework convention, but for the amendments that were adopted last year and the amendments that are now being considered. The people want to hear a discussion of this in Parliament. And so I do not believe, I would be happy to be wrong, but while some of the members of Parliament and the Senate in Australia have spoken out about the treaty and maybe about the amendments, I don't think a single person in the world has said anything. I should take that back. I don't think a single standing member of any parliament or any government in the world has said a word about the amendments that were adopted on May 27th, 2022, and the deadline to reject them is December 1st. Absolute silence. And so,
and just for everybody, those amendments there that you're talking about that have been adopted, and we would love for our leaders to reject them. They're 5 amendments, and they're really to do with, and correct me if I'm wrong or elaborate on it, they're mainly to do with the time periods that are allotted to amendments being adopted and rejected. Is that
exactly.
around
and so the current, no, that's a pretty direct way. The current situation is, and I think I maybe said this before, but I'll repeat it. When the Assembly, the World Health Assembly, adopts any amendments to the international health regulations, they do not come back to the Australian Parliament or Prime Minister to be voted on or debated or discussed. And the whole purpose of the petition to get Parliament to discuss these things was to drive home the fact that they don't have any power. The power rests in the Prime Minister to just write a letter to the WHO to reject the amendments. They are so out of touch that they don't understand that decades ago, they handed over power from one area of the government to another branch of the government. And so they could discuss it and they could possibly put pressure on the Prime Minister in a political way. But there's no legal way to make this happen because the international health regulations were adopted in 1969 and amended in 2005. And the agreement that was made decades ago was a massive mistake. It took authority away from the people and members of Parliament, and it put most of that authority in unknown, unelected, unaccountable delegates. And the Prime Minister of Australia can just write a letter and reject them. But they signed on to them, when they were presented back in 2022. And so one of the things that a lot of people also say, and I actually did a decent amount of reporting and I was paying attention. I believe you're in Western Australia?
Yes.
Okay. It's almost a year ago where people were up in the streets wanting to kill the bill. And
that's right.
My understanding is that you all can be, worried that I think you have one of the most egregious pieces of legislation giving authority to, basically goons to do the bidding of your premier anytime they want to call an emergency. That piece of legislation is an absolute abomination. And so I preemptively say that because many people, especially in the United States, they say things like, oh, the WHO doesn't have authority over us. We have our Constitution and the Senate would never adopt it. No, the problem is being grown at home. Whatever they did over the last 4 years in many areas around the world, they're crafting legislation like what happened with the bill that didn't get killed.
Yeah, so just for everybody,
it's absolutely frightening.
Just for everybody that doesn't know about Western Australia, Mark McGowan, our illustrious Premier, who is no longer our Premier, he left us with a parting gift, and that was the Emergency Management Amendment Bill of 2022. And essentially what that is that COVID-appointed officers, and we don't know who they are, but, we point anybody we like, COVID-appointed officers, when there's an emergency declared, and who knows what the definition of an emergency is, when an emergency is declared, COVID-appointed officer can come to your home without a warrant, remove anything from your home, remove your pets, remove your children, take you off to a quarantine facility, forcibly inject you with whatever they deem as necessary, and keep you there. And all of this can be done without a warrant. So that is the parting gift that Mr. Mark McGowan left or gave to us, West Australians. And I can't remember the date when that runs out, but you can bet your bottom dollar that they'll just, keep it as it is, and not let that one fall away very quickly. You can guarantee that. So this is a wonderful thing about the World Health Organization, and even when we're talking as we are today about the international health regulations, they'll purport, and it is true that they don't take away our sovereignty, but what they do is they pass it down the line to the nations where they in turn attack us, their own people, and take away our sovereignty. That's how the World Health Organization is so sneaky and underhanded that, yes, our sovereignty will be taken away, But the World Health Organization can wash their hands and say, "Oh, it wasn't us. We didn't do it. We it wasn't anything to do with us."
Yep,
It's,
exactly. And so, unfortunately, in many ways, that is sort of a template legislation that other nations, have attempted to do. And so it really comes down to an educational battle. It's a psychological operation where our fellow citizens, men, women, children, young and old, uh, have no idea that this is happening. They have absolutely
well,
no idea about what we're talking about here. And so when people are unaware, they're not going to do anything. When you
even you were
present
just talking. Sorry,
go
Joe.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, you were just talking about parliamentarians, that they have no idea about this, and there's no discussion in Parliament. And I don't think it's any mistake that, particularly in Australia at the moment, we have this referendum business happening with the yes and the no vote, and all of the parliamentarians are spending all of their time in Parliament talking about the yes and the no vote. And I really do think that this is, just another way to distract not only the public but our parliamentarians, because we do have things like this with the IHR, and not only do they not know about it, they're purposely distracted. You just talked about psychological operation. Our minds are the battlefield at the moment. This fifth generational war, and it's not only the public, it's also our parliamentarians. So undoubtedly they haven't heard about it, and they haven't heard about it on purpose. That would be my opinion. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so a lot of times people will ask what you can do. Folks in Australia should know that there's numerous groups around the country, not the least of which is AustraliaExitsTheWho.com. Been at the forefront of trying to spread the word about this. A lot of wonderful people around the world. There are dozens of nations who have put out, or the people groups in the nations who are actively pushing back against this. You can go to exitthewho.org and you can see what many, many other nations are doing. I'll give a little bit of an advance notice if anybody from Canada is listening to this. Hopefully, very soon, there will be an official petition that I believe is going to circulate for 120 days to exit the UN and the WHO. And so, I realize that the crazy government of, it's an argument, who's got the worst government, right? Is it Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand? It's a mess. It's highly unlikely that their prime minister is going to remove them from the WHO. But the point is, these types of official government petitions do carry a little bit of weight. They do get presented to Parliament. It is something that's done in the public. But, it will be a gauge of how many people in Canada are that dissatisfied with what is going on here. And I don't think that the people who are trying to push all of this through have the foggiest clue as to how many of us have been watching what they're attempting to do. And I believe that they would have loved to have just very quietly, not had anybody find out about it, just have their negotiations, adopt their amendments in their treaty, let some time go by before it became fully enforced. And then when they started doing all of those things, and everybody said, well, wait a minute, that's what they hoped for. But the most important thing that anybody can do is actually really simple. Take this video and just share it with everybody you possibly can to raise their awareness. Probably 90% of people are not going to watch it. They're not going to get to the point where I wave at them and say, hi, thanks for being all the way at the end here. If you're here and you're listening, give me a phone call. My number, I'm in the United States. You can get on WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal. My number's +1 for the US, and it's 310-619-3055. If you have any questions, by all means, go to stoptheamendments.com and look over the information. But if you have any questions, give me a call, send me a message on any of those apps. share this video like you've never shared anything in your life, and send it to people and say, hey, tell me what you think about this.
Mhm.
The proper answer for almost everybody should be, well, I had no idea that's what was going on,
Mhm.
because they don't. And so
Yep.
if you're the one who raises their awareness, maybe they don't care. Maybe they have to worry about their life because they're just trying to get by and they don't have the time or energy to deal with this. But maybe you trigger somebody who knows a lot of people and spreads the word. And before you know it, thousands and millions and maybe even billions of people start to pay attention. And
Mhm.
it's, if you ever had a pet or know somebody who's had a pet and um, they're about to try to snatch some food or something, and you catch them and you make eye contact with them, and they realize that they've been busted, and they're like,
Mhm.
right. Um, when you shine a light on the action of cockroaches, they go running away, right?
Mm.
And that's what we need to do. We need to have as many eyeballs as possible watching what these people are doing, because they're not going to put it on TV. They're not going to put it in the newspaper. Thank you very much for the opportunity to put it here. But
Mm.
we all need to be the media. We need to take information and hand it to the next person who hands it to the next person, and so on. And hopefully this answered a lot of questions. The
Mm.
short version of a long story is a bunch of unelected people are overreaching. They're trying to change international law that would ultimately control your life, give them a lot of money, and they don't want you to see what they're doing. And even though they're failing, they're going to resort to attempting to, bend the rules to the point of breaking them. In my book, that's called lying and cheating.
That's
And
right.
that's, they're just simply, the only thing I can't really, figure out is they said it, the quiet part out loud in public. And so,
Yeah.
kudos to them for, sharing their dirty laundry in public. But we have to call them out on the fact that there is a deadline. It's written in the regulations. It's crystal clear, and no amount of legalese, crazy language is going to change the fact that they're trying to cheat. I'm not
Exactly.
having it. Just not having it.
Mm. The only thing I'd add is, not only is our leaders' silence consent to these amendments, we can also speak about that in regards to the general public as well. So, as you've just said, share this video, have conversations. If people didn't know about it, then that leads on to other conversations. If we are silent as well, we are essentially consenting to these unelected bureaucrats who want to change the planet and all of our lives. So, yeah, try to have those tough conversations with people. Absolutely. Is there something you'd like to add, James, before we finish the stream today?
Well, there's probably a million things. The one thing I would say that I would like to encourage people to do is realize that your circle of people that you can communicate can be made to grow if you use the Socratic method. Don't try to tell people what to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take this video or take any other information that you might consider interesting. You don't have to necessarily agree with it, but get the list of everybody you know, everybody you have a phone number for, everybody you have an email for, if you've texted them, if you're on social media or whatever. Don't miss a single person. Send this to them and just say, could you please look at this when you have time and give me your opinion? Okay.
Mm.
If it doesn't do anything other than start to create a relationship where you can actually communicate, as opposed to, you need to do this, or you should believe that, or I think that's crazy. If you
Yeah.
share this and you say, can I have your, you know what? Politicians are supposed to do that. Political public servants are supposed to reach out to their constituents and not
Yep.
pontificate and be condescending and push the people down saying, no, 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 you're wrong. This is what you must have. What politicians are supposed to do, we, the people, could actually do to our fellow men and women. And you know what? You're psychic, because there is something that I wanted to say, and it just came into my head. Most Australians are probably not familiar with all of the words of the Star Spangled Banner, our national anthem, right? But the last line is, "O'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." And what I've been noticing is there's so much fear mongering out there. I actually did a study of emotions 20 years ago. I was deep down the rabbit hole learning about the language of emotions. And the opposite of fear is courage. And you know, your opening entry, virus is the contagion, if I have that right.
Fear is the virus. Yep.
Fear is the virus. Fear is the virus, and courage is the cure. And so have the courage to just reach out to everybody you possibly can, share this with them, and just say, just tell me your opinion. No judgment, no coercion. Let them tell you who they really are in some given issue, and decide whether you think it's best to try to change their mind or just move on and share it with somebody else. Because I personally think it's more effective to find people that want to work with you and put your effort into working together to accomplish whatever you all agree on than it is to try to talk to a brick wall who doesn't want to hear it and is incapable of learning only because they just don't want to know. So share this with everybody. Have the courage to do that. When the amount of courage flows and it is greater than the fear that everybody has, then we'll get our freedom. We'll get our freedom back. Over the land of the free and the home of the brave here in the United States, we need to find more courage. And they're manufacturing fear at far too great a clip.
Well, and courage is contagious. So once you start, finding those people and having those conversations, it tends to spread a social contagion in a really positive way, not one of these awful ones that destroy people.
You can be a super spreader of courage.
Yeah, that's great. I thank you so much for joining me today, James, and I'll put all the links and also the links to the videos in the description so people can go along and watch those as well. I just want to say thank you for joining me again, and thanks everyone for watching.
Have a good day.
Thanks, James.